had been increased, and I wondered if that had anything to do with his listlessness. "This is hopeless," Betsy finally said after we'd been there for over an hour. She was right. It was futile to spend any more time with Szabo that day. She and I got up to leave, and so did Linda Cole, who was small like Betsy and very attractive. She hadn't said more than a dozen words during the hour. There wasn't any need for her to talk if her client didn't. Szabo suddenly looked up from a spot on the table. He'd been staring at it for at least 20 minutes. He looked straight at me and finally spoke. "You got the wrong man." Then Frederick Szabo grinned like the craziest person I had ever met in my life. Betsy and I returned to Hazelwood and the mountains of grunt work that still had to be done there. Sampson met us. By 10:30 that night, we'd gone through everything we could find at the hospital. We had managed to identify 19 staff members who'd spent time with Szabo. The short list included 6 therapists who'd seen him. Betsy and I tacked the pictures up on one wall. Then I walked back and forth staring at them, hoping for a blinding insight. Where the hell was the money? How had Szabo actually controlled the robbery murders? I sat down again. Intermittently, we had revisited the mystery of James Walsh's supposed suicide and the sudden disappearance of Michael Dodd. Szabo had refused to answer any questions about the 2 agents. Why would he murder the 2 of them? What was his real plan? God damn him! Could Szabo really be behind all this, Alex? Is he that clever? I pushed myself up from the desk I was working at. I don't know anymore. It's late. I'm fried, Betsy. I'm out of here. Tomorrow's another day. I got home and climbed upstairs to bed. I'd been working too hard for too long. At about 20 past 2, I woke up. I'd been having a conversation with Frederick Szabo in my sleep. It was a bad, bad time to be awake. I usually don't remember my dreams, which probably means I'm repressing them. But I woke with a clear and very disturbing image of the last couple of minutes. The bank robber Tony Brophy had been describing his first meeting with the mastermind. How he'd been sitting behind bright lights and could only see a silhouette of the man. The silhouette he described didn't match the shape of Frederick Szabo's head, not even close. He had talked about a big hooked nose and large ears. He had mentioned the ears a couple of times. Big ears, like a car with both doors open. Szabo actually had small ears and a regular nose. But there was someone else who came to mind. Jesus. I rolled over out of bed. I stared out my window until my mind was more focused and clear. Then I called Betsy. She picked up after the second ring. "It's Alex. Sorry to call you to wake you. I think I know who the mastermind is." There were 2 masterminds. It sounded crazy to me at first, but then I was almost sure it had to be the answer to so many things about the investigation that didn't make sense. Szabo was one mastermind, but he'd been given the name as a joke because he was too efficient, too perfect. There was someone else, a second mastermind. This person wasn't a joke to his peers. He had no peers. He didn't write hate mail from his room at a veterans hospital. It took me a few minutes to convince Betsy that I might be right. Then we called Kyle Craig at Quantico. We went 2-on-1 until Kyle was convinced enough to let us move forward in a whole new, mind-boggling direction. At 11 that morning, she and I boarded a plane at Bowling Field. Just past 1 o'clock, we landed at Palm Beach International Airport in South Florida. We were met by FBI agents, but Betsy was in charge, even in Florida. The local agents deferred to her. We got on I-95 north. Once we left the small, very well-run airport, we proceeded about 10 miles, then headed east toward the ocean and Singer Island. I'd had time on the flight to think about my theory of 2 masterminds. The more I thought it through, the surer I became that we were on the right track finally. A vivid image kept flashing through my mind. It was a photograph of a therapist named Dr. Bernard Francis. The photo had been stapled to Francis' personnel file. 2 other photos had been hanging on the walls of Dr. Chaffee's office. I'd seen them there when I interviewed him. Bernard Francis was tall and balding, with a broad forehead and a hooked nose. He also had large ears, floppy ones. Francis had been Frederick Szabo's therapist for 9 weeks in '97, and then for 5 months last year. At the end of the year, he had transferred to Florida, supposedly, to work at the Veterans Hospital in North West Palm. During the plane ride to Florida, I reread the actual notes Dr. Francis had made about Szabo in '97, and then last year. One of the very insightful early notes posed the question, did patient actually spend the past 20-some years wandering the country performing odd jobs? Somehow, this doesn't ring true. Suspect patient has a very active fantasy life, and may be withholding from us. What really precipitated patient's stay at Hazelwood this year? Betsy and I knew the answer to that question, and we suspected Francis had found out too. In February of '97, Frederick Szabo had been fired from his job as head of security at First Union. There had been a series of unsolved robberies at First Unions in Virginia and Maryland. Szabo had blamed himself for the lapse in security, and then, so had the bank. They finally fired him. Soon after that, he had a nervous breakdown and checked himself into Hazelwood, which was where the fun and mind games began. We set up a round-the-clock surveillance post outside Dr. Francis's condominium on Singer Island. The place was a sprawling 4-bedroom penthouse with a roof deck. It was right on the water. It seemed beyond the means of the average therapist at a veterans hospital. Francis was spending the evening entertaining a blonde woman who looked to be about half his age. Betsy, 2 agents, and I camped out in a Dodge van in a parking lot behind the condos. The lot was nearly full, and the van blended in. It had a periscope that allowed us to watch Francis and his guest as they barbecued steaks on his deck. We watched the good doctor as he frequently hugged and fondled the blonde woman while cooking dinner. Then the two of them disappeared inside for about 10 minutes. They came out again, and during the meal, they played footsie and stroked one another. They finished a second bottle of Stag's Leap Cabernet, then disappeared inside again. Finally, the blonde woman left for the night. Dr. Francis stayed out on the deck, sipping a snifter of brandy, watching the moon rise high over the Atlantic. Francis' cell phone rang around midnight. We listened to the call from the surveillance van. The caller sounded nervous. "Bernie, they're all over this place again. They're looking at staff now. Francis cut in. "It's late. I'll call you in the morning. Don't call me here. I've told you that. Please don't do it again." Dr. Francis hung up angrily. He drained the rest of his brandy. Betsy elbowed me. She was smiling for the first time since we'd been watching Francis. "Alex, you recognize the voice on the other end?" she asked. I sure did. The lovely and talented Kathleen McGeegan. Nurse McGeegan is part of this. It's all starting to come together, isn't it? Kathleen McGeegan didn't try to call Francis back that night, and he didn't call her. Around 1 o'clock, he went inside to bed and turned on his alarm system. "Sweet dreams, you bastard," Betsy said as the house lights went off. "We know where he lives. We know he did it, if not exactly how, but we can't bring him down," one of the agents complained once Francis had turned in for the night. "Patience, patience," I said. "We just want to watch him a little longer. We need to be absolutely sure this time, and we want the money he stole." Betsy and I finally left the surveillance van around 2 in the morning. We were back inside the FBI surveillance van by 9 the following morning. "What's happening, gentlemen?" she asked the agents crowded into the van. We were told that Francis was up and that he hadn't called Kathleen McGeegan yet. I had an idea and made a suggestion. Betsy liked it a lot. We called Kyle Craig and got him at home. Kyle liked the idea, too. Agents in Arlington, Virginia, arrested Nurse McGeegan at a little past 10 that morning. She was questioned and denied knowing anything about a relationship between Dr. Bernard Francis and Frederick Szabo. She also denied any involvement in the scheme herself. Agents, meanwhile, were searching McGeegan's house and yard. Around noon, they found one of the diamonds from the Metro Hartford job. McGeegan panicked, and she changed her story. She told the FBI what she knew about Dr. Francis, Frederick Szabo, and the robbery kidnappings. "Yes, yes, yes, yes," Betsy Cavalier said, and jumped around the back of the surveillance van when she heard the news. "We've got him. Dr. Francis is going down." At a little past 2 that afternoon, she and I walked across the manicured front lawn and up the brick stairway into Francis' building. We took the elevator up to the 5th floor, the penthouse, the mastermind's lair. "I can't wait to see his face," Betsy said as she rang the bell. Dr. Francis answered the door. He was tan, dressed in Florida Gators sweatpants, a Miami Dolphins t-shirt, no socks or shoes. Betsy identified who we were. She then told Dr. Francis we were part of the team investigating the Metro Hartford kidnapping and several bank robberies back east. Francis seemed momentarily confused. "I don't think I understand. Why are you here? I haven't been in Washington, well, in nearly a year." I spoke up. "May we come in, Dr. Francis? We want to talk to you about a former patient of yours named Frederick Szabo." Francis managed to look even more confused. "Frederick Szabo? You're kidding me, right?" "We kid you not," Betsy said emphatically. Francis became petulant. "I'll be in my office at the hospital in West Palm on Monday. The hospital is on Blue Heron. We can talk about my former patients there. Please, leave my home now." Dr. Francis tried to slam the door in my face. I stopped it with the heel of my hand. "This can't wait until Monday." He sighed, but continued to look incredibly pissed off. "Oh, all right. I was just making myself coffee. Come in, if you must." "We must," I told the mastermind. "Why the hell are you here?" Francis asked again, as we followed him through an all-glass loggia that faced down onto the rolling surf of the Atlantic several floors below. "Frederick Szabo figured it all out for you, didn't he?" I said, just to break the ice. "He had an elaborate fantasy for revenge against the banks. He had all the know-how, the obsession, the contacts. Isn't that how it happened?" "What the hell are you talking about?" Francis looked at Betsy and me as if we were as deranged as some of his mental patients. I ignored the look and the condescension in his voice. "You heard about his plans in your therapy sessions with Szabo. You were impressed by the detail, the precision. He'd thought through everything. You also learned he hadn't been a drifter all those years since the war. You found out he'd worked for the First Union Bank. Surprise, surprise. He'd been a security executive. He really did know about banks and how to rob them. He was crazy, but not in the way you had thought." Francis flicked on a coffee maker on the kitchen counter. "I won't even dignify this horseshit with a response. I'd offer you both coffee, but I'm angry. Please finish with your nonsense, then you can both leave." "You killed all those people without any remorse. You murdered Walsh and Dodd. You're the madman, the mastermind, not Frederick Szabo. It's you who is crazy. You're both crazy," Dr. Francis said. "I'm a respected physician, a decorated Army officer. One of the bank crew members you interviewed remembered you. He described you as tall, broad forehead, hooked nose, large ears. That's not Frederick Szabo." Francis turned away from his coffee making and let out a harsh, unpleasant laugh. "Oh, that's very compelling evidence, Detective. I'd like to hear you present that to the district attorney in Washington. I'll bet the DA would get a good belly laugh out of it, too." I smiled back at him. "We already have talked to the DA. She didn't laugh. By the way, Kathleen McGeegan has talked to us, too. Since you didn't return her call, we went to see her. You're under arrest for robbery, kidnapping, and murder." Suddenly, Francis broke for the glass door that led out onto the rooftop deck. I knew there was nowhere for him to go out there. What was he doing? "Francis, no!" I shouted. Betsy and I pulled our guns simultaneously, but we didn't fire. There was no reason to kill him. We rushed out through the door and followed Francis in a sprint across the weathered wooden deck. When he reached the far wall of the roof deck, Francis dove off the terrace, which was at least 5 floors above the street. Bernard Francis dove, head first. He'd break his neck for sure. There was no way he'd live. "I don't believe it," Betsy screeched as we got to the edge of the deck and looked down. I didn't believe what I saw either. Francis had made a dive 5 stories down into a shimmery blue swimming pool. He was just surfacing after the dive. He began to stroke rapidly toward the pool's far wall. I had no choice. I didn't hesitate. I went off the high roof deck after Dr. Francis. Betsy was no more than half a step behind me. I hit the surface of the water with my backside first. I shot to the bottom, hit it pretty hard. But then I was paddling to the surface, swimming as fast as I could toward the far wall. I climbed out of the pool and saw Francis running